Welcome to my true criminal abode. As ever, it is wonderful to see you here. I know, long time no see. I know, I'm so sorry. I really am so sorry. It's a very long, boring story. In a nutshell, my computer got sent off for repair. I didn't have a computer for a week. It came back fine. My computer's fine, but none of my tech worked. None of my tech worked. This is my fourth time recording this video. About a week ago, I did the third time and I said, third time lucky. It's got to be third time lucky. It wasn't third time lucky. So this is the fourth time. Nothing is working. Everything breaks. And as I sit here, I'm kind of waiting for something to break. Things just literally break around me. I need divine help at this point. I don't know what's going on. So just pray for me. Fourth time lucky. Anyway, I do want to say an absolutely massive, massive thank you to anybody who has liked, subscribed, commented, any interaction, anything at all. I really, really appreciate it. Honestly, I really, really do. It's meant a lot. Like so many people, I really, really struggle with my confidence. And if you've watched a few videos, you'll probably have gotten on that I do have BPD as well. So my mental health isn't always great anyway. And I've wanted to do this for so long, but with BPD, you have these extremes. You kind of, everything's fine. And then the next minute, everything's terrible. And I can get myself set up and then I can't do this because everyone's going to hate me. Everyone's going to get off the screen. I have a face for radio. I just envisioned so much hate, but I've not had that, and it means so much. I'm sure I will at some point, but I've not had that, and I'm so grateful. Thank you so much. So talking about my BPD is actually quite a good segue into the case that we're covering today. So the case today is about a lady called Katherine Knight. You might have heard of her. Then again, you might not have heard of her. When she committed her crime, what she did was so horrific that some media outlets, they refused to cover it. They believed that people waking up the next day, reading the newspaper, it would just be too horrific for them to read about whilst they were having their breakfast. This case was so horrific that Katherine Knight was actually the first woman in Australian history to receive a sentence of life, but with no possibility of parole. No possibility of parole. She is never, ever getting out. What she did was that bad that some of the officers attending the scene, they were traumatised. They had to take leave. They had PTSD. Some of the officers, they even stopped eating meat. Why? Because Katherine Knight cooked her partner, dished him up on plates to serve to his children. That's how bad this case was. And there's more. That's not all she did. So obviously it goes without saying that there are trigger warnings in this case. If you know me by now, you will know that when I say look after yourself, I mean it. I trigger myself sometimes. I have to walk away from cases that I'm researching sometimes. So I really do mean it when I say look after yourself. So anyway, with that, we will get on with the not so lovely case of Katherine Knight. So Katherine Mary Knight, she was born on October the 24th, 1955 at Tenterfield Hospital, which is in New South Wales. So today's case is from Australia. Her mother was Barbara Ruhan and her father was Ken Knight. Now, when Katherine was born, she was born into a family of dysfunction. To understand this a little bit, we need to go back a little bit to just before Katherine was born and just talk for a moment about her mother Barbara. So Barbara was married to a man called Jack Ruhan. They had 4 sons together. They had 4 sons, Patrick, Martin, Neville and Barry. And Barbara had an affair with one of her husband's friends. He was a friend and colleague. His name was Ken Knight. Ken Knight later goes on to become Katherine's father, Katherine Knight. But anyway, for now, Barbara is having this affair with Ken. So it's before Katherine was born. And where they lived in Aberdeen, this was a small conservative town. Now we're talking the 1950s here, and affairs at that time, especially if you're a woman, were really, really frowned upon in these small conservative communities. So because of the scandalous nature of this affair, Barbara and Ken ended up fleeing Aberdeen, and they ended up in a place called Moree. And as I said, before Barbara and Ken fled to Moree, Barbara had 4 sons already with Jack, her husband. She left them behind. She left her sons behind. 2 of them stayed with Jack. 2 of them went to be raised by an aunt in Sydney. I don't want to be too judgmental here because I don't know the circumstances. I don't know the reason why 2 of the boys went to stay with an aunt, and there might be a good reason. And I've got no issue with the fact that they stayed with their father over their mother. That's fine too. It might have been their choice. But what the problem was is that we can already see this fracture that is going on in the family. There's potential for a lot of resentment from the 4 boys that Barbara left behind. Even if they did decide to stay with their father, it's not going to stop them kind of resenting her or to feel like they've been abandoned by their mother, because they're going to feel like she abandoned them for a relationship with a man. That's how they're going to feel. I'm not for any second saying that people should stay together for the sake of the children. That's just as unhealthy. But there are ways to kind of soften the blow. I don't feel like she would have softened that blow for them. Now, I could be wrong. I could be very, very wrong. But there is definitely going to be a fracture in the family. So by the time Katherine is born, her half-siblings aren't living in the household. Now, Barbara went on to have 4 more children with Ken. She had 2 more sons, Charlie and Shane, and she had 2 daughters. They were twin daughters, twin girls. The oldest one was Joy, and the youngest one was Katherine. Like I say, by the time Katherine is born, she is going to be noticing some of that thread of abandonment running through this household. And this is actually really, really important because one of the big aspects of Katherine's personality is this fear of abandonment. And it's something that she carries into all of her relationships in adulthood. Now, Jack Ruhan, he actually passed away in 1959. And so what happened was the 2 older boys that had been living with him, they then came to live with Katherine and the other 3 children. So there's 6 children now in the house. You can imagine the kind of disharmony that's going to be going on in this family. The boys have just lost their father. So there's going to be grief going on as well in the house. And I just don't get the impression Barbara and Ken would have done very much to soften the blow for these children emotionally. In fact, there was actually significant violence in the home environment at that time. Ken was a violent alcoholic. He would frequently rape Barbara up to 10 times a day sometimes. I'm not sure he did this in front of the children per se, but that doesn't matter because Barbara, she shared the intimate details of the sexual abuse, her sexual relationship. She shared those details with her daughters. She would basically express disdain for men to them. Clearly, Barbara's suffering. She was being raped by her husband, but you go to a counsellor. You don't involve your children. You get help some other way. So Katherine is growing up with this idea that men are bad. She's witnessing it from her father, and she's being told that by her mother. The 2 most important people in Catherine's life are shaping her perceptions about what a normal, healthy relationship is. I'll give you an example. When Catherine's older, she's basically uncomfortable with a sex act that a partner wants her to perform. She goes to her mother for advice, and Barbara basically tells Catherine to tolerate it, to stop complaining, to put up with it. I mean, what kind of mother tells their daughter to stop complaining and tolerate a sex act that she doesn't want to participate in? Basically, she's teaching her daughter, not only do you do what a man wants you to do, but you're this sort of helpless participant in what the man's telling you to do. Now, when Catherine was interviewed by the police years later, she actually claimed that she was sexually abused by her brothers up until the age of about 11. If the boys in that household, not only are they witnessing their father assaulting their mother, but they're witnessing the mother telling the daughters to tolerate it, then it's no wonder, if it is true, that the brothers went on to abuse their sister. This is alleged. It's what Catherine claimed. I believe the psychiatrists that interviewed Catherine, they did believe her. It was also confirmed by some other family members, I believe. The reason there's some skepticism, because I wouldn't normally question anybody who says they've been abused, but the skepticism is just because Catherine is not the most reliable of individuals. And of course, she'd been arrested. Was she using this as some kind of ploy to lessen her sentence somehow? There's also a question that possibly her father might have abused her as well. Again, this is alleged, but it's a potential factor, perhaps. But with the brothers, something interesting and makes what Catherine was saying reliable. In 2021, one of her brothers, Neville Ruhan, was actually arrested for allegedly plying boys with drugs and alcohol so that he could systematically abuse them over a span of 14 years. So one of her brothers has been arrested for sexual assault. So I do believe that there was sexual abuse in that home. It wasn't just sexual abuse. Barbara was also being hit. She would often sustain black eyes. The children, they would obviously see Barbara in this state. They witnessed this. And it got to a point that they were so used to it that they became desensitized. And again, this is another aspect of Catherine's approach to her relationships, that number one, there's this thread of abandonment, and then there's this impression of what a healthy relationship is, which it isn't, but she has this idea that men are bad, that she has no autonomy over her own body, and then now she has this desensitization to violence. And all of that together explains a lot of the reasons why she does what she does in her relationships. Basically, she gets to a point where she is the aggressor. She thinks that if she instigates or attacks other people first, they're not going to be able to attack or abuse her. Now, allegedly, her parents actually beat the children as well, and this sort of early exposure to such aggression was ultimately a sort of contributing factor in the development of Catherine's own aggressive behaviour patterns in her own relationships. Now, Catherine doesn't have very many close relationships. She's got a close relationship with her twin sister Joy, but one relationship she does have is with her uncle Oscar Knight. And this is a significant relationship because he is one of the few men in Catherine's life that she comes to trust. Now, sadly, in 1969, Oscar commits suicide, and this has a devastating effect on Catherine. She is deeply, deeply affected. Now, there's already this abandonment thread, and her uncle's suicide is going to add to that because she's going to feel abandoned by her uncle. Now, clearly, this is not her uncle's fault. When you're that low and that's the only option that you think you have, you're not thinking necessarily about the impact on other people. If anything, you're thinking people are better off without you. So this is no reflection at all on her uncle, but it would still have a profound impact on her. The people that are left behind by suicide, they are left wondering, why did you leave me? Why couldn't you talk to me? Wasn't I good enough? All these things that not only have you got the grief, but it's compounded by these questions. And this was all so much for Catherine that to this day, she believes that she sees the ghost of her uncle. Now, this smacks of unresolved trauma, of unresolved grief. You know, when you experience a traumatic loss, your brain has to cope with this overwhelming pain. And for some people, this can lead to kind of like a detachment from reality. It's a coping mechanism. Of course, not to dismiss anybody out there that believes that she might actually be seeing her uncle. You know, that is a possibility. I have been known to see the odd thing myself, but whether that's a mental health issue or whether that's something I'm actually seeing, I don't know. Um, but I think, regardless of what you think, I think the ultimate thing to take away from this is that Catherine should have got help. She should have got counselling. If not those things, the stability and support from a loving family to see her through this trauma. And from everything I've told you about Barbara and Ken, I don't think she got that. So shortly after Oscar's death, the family relocated back to Aberdeen. Catherine went to Muswellbrook High School, and there she and her sister were known for being kind of rough, intimidating. Catherine actually carried a knife, and she did get into altercations with other students. From what I can tell, they were predominantly male students that Catherine would have these altercations with. It's not surprising. When you consider Catherine's upbringing, it's hardly surprising that she felt this need to protect herself from men, not justifying anything at all. I'm just trying to understand where it's coming from, because ultimately, if we can understand and get to the root of where things are coming from, then it just helps to understand things and prevent things in the future, right? An interesting thing in this case as well, and something that I've seen on some other sources, some people get a bit confused. A lot of people, they describe the scary side of Catherine's personality, but some people say that she was this lovely, friendly, pleasant girl, and it kind of just seems this weird dichotomy going on. And to me, it makes absolute sense because of the BPD aspect. Now, she's not actually been diagnosed with BPD yet. This is something that comes later on. But as somebody with BPD, I can kind of see it. And I believe that the reason for this kind of split in her personality that people describe is literally something called splitting, which is a bit like I described at the beginning, how for me, I kind of will go very, very extreme in my behavior. One minute I'm kind of down there, the next minute I'm up here. It's very, very quick, very, very instant. I think that that's what's happening here. She's being described as this lovely, kind girl to suddenly splitting and attacking people. And I think that is the BPD, I think. Now, Catherine left school when she was 15, and apparently she couldn't read or write, or at least not very well. Now, when she left school, she actually went to work in a clothing factory as a cutter. An apt title, I think, but yeah, she was cutting up clothes, obviously, fabric. I don't know what she was doing. Whatever she was doing, it wasn't her dream job. Her dream job was actually to work in a slaughterhouse. Now, that sounds absolutely bonkers to a lot of people, to think that your dream job is to work in a slaughterhouse. It sounds bonkers to me, but that's because I don't eat meat, so it sounds bonkers anyway. But I think what's going on here, and the reason that she wants to work in this slaughterhouse, is because it's something that runs through her family, it runs through the community. It's just what people at that time in that community did. It's like anywhere, any community where there's a local factory, whatever that is. In this case, it happens to be a slaughterhouse, but it's kind of where everybody works. And I think what's happening here is that she wants to work there because she wants to fit in. She doesn't want to stand out. She wants to be the same as everybody else. And that makes sense to me. As somebody with BPD, I always felt like an outsider. I never felt like I fit in. I wasn't diagnosed until my 30s, so I had no idea what was going on with me. And this is going to be very, very similar to Catherine. She is not going to be understanding what she's going through, what she's thinking, what she's feeling, but she's just going to have this strong desire to fit in. And I think that's why she has this strong desire to work in slaughterhouse. The problem is, a slaughterhouse is obviously a place of violence. And Catherine, she has an unstable personality. So, her working around this violence and becoming even more desensitized than she already is, that is not going to help an already unstable personality. Now, her co workers, they did actually notice that Catherine would go to the front of the production line and enjoy watching the pigs having their throats cut. There was obviously a level of enjoyment on top of her unstable personality. Now, her co workers just thought that she was eager to learn, but there was something else going on. Now, when I talk about the BPD, this is her personality. These are the aspects that make up her desire to fit in, her fear of abandonment, those sort of things. That is not the same as this thrill that she is getting from violence. That is a totally different thing and unrelated to the BPD. For most slaughterhouse workers, I really, really hope they try and make what they do as quick as possible. For Catherine, it was a case of nicking an artery and watching the animal bleed slowly to death. So, yeah, I don't think that a slaughterhouse was a good place, not only for somebody with an unstable personality, but also for somebody who was developing this thrill from this violence. If you're desensitized to violence and you're getting some kind of thrill from violence, then working in a slaughterhouse is just going to exacerbate it. In fact, she gets an obsession with knives. Her prized possession was actually a collection of sharp boning knives. She uses these knives to intimidate her partners, basically. She even hangs the knives over her bed, claiming just in case she needs them. So there's, without doubt, something going on here. Something going on, clearly. So we can obviously see the volatility that Catherine has had growing up. So, as you can imagine, going into adulthood and going into her own relationships, she has a history of violence against her own partners. She was known to be possessive and controlling, and it all makes sense. She's manipulating her relationships because it's giving her that power that she lacks in her own life, and it's taking away the other person's ability to control her. The possessiveness that she has, that's coming from that fear of abandonment thread that I've spoken about in the house. So she meets a man called David Kellett, and it's her first significant relationship. She's about 17 and he's 22 when they meet in 1973. Now, Kellett, he had gone through some traumatic incidents at his previous employment, and this led to him numbing the pain with alcohol. Basically, he worked on the railways in Coffs Harbour. There were a couple of incidents there, highly traumatic incidents. In the first one, he witnessed his best friend killed in a shunting accident. Now, that's pretty gruesome on its own. The second incident was a train hit a school bus. Kellett, he went into this school bus to help rescue the children. Now, unfortunately, 6 children actually lost their lives from that incident. And as you can imagine, the absolutely harrowing, horrific images that he would be carrying with him, and that guilt of not being able to help all of the children that died, even though it wasn't his fault, he would feel like it was his fault. It's just one of those life incidences that you wouldn't wish on anybody, and he ended up self-medicating with alcohol. it would have been better if he got help some other way, some healthy way, but that's what he did. Now, because he was drinking, he would sometimes get himself into kind of scrapes when he was out. And so if he was in a bar and got into an altercation with somebody, it was Catherine that actually stepped in to protect him. She would basically stand up for him and support him during these fights. So much so that she actually got a reputation in the town that they lived for being aggressive and for fighting and enjoying the violence. Now, we've seen that kind of seed of her enjoying the violence. That seed was kind of growing at the slaughterhouse. You can kind of see this progression from attacking boys in school to now attacking men in bars. And this kind of initial protection factor has kind of morphed into a thrill that she's also getting. So in 1974, when Catherine had turned 18, her and Kellett actually married. Now, the service, he was intoxicated and she was riding a motorbike and driving him to the service. It wasn't just the sort of untraditional aspect of the woman driving the man to the church kind of thing. There was this symbolism of the fact that it showed an aspect of her lack of trust of men and her possessiveness. I get the impression that she was the one that kind of forced him to get married. I'm saying that because it comes up. It comes up a few times in later relationships that she has this need to marry the men that she's with. And that's kind of because of her own possessiveness and distrust and fear of abandonment. And also, obviously, it's a way for her to maintain control over her relationship. Now, Barbara obviously knew about this sort of side of Catherine's personality, this possessiveness in her. She was fully aware of her daughter's mood swings and volatile behaviour because she actually said to Kellett, "You better watch this one or she'll fucking kill you. Stir her up the wrong way or do the wrong thing, then you're fucked. Don't ever think of playing up on her or she'll fucking kill you." To me, it just proves that Barbara had this awareness of her daughter's mental state. She could see it, but she didn't do anything about it. It's that same attitude of, when Catherine went to her for advice about her relationship and Barbara said, just tolerate it. It's very much that kind of attitude of just get on with it, rather than like, I think we need to get you some help. We need to get you to a doctor. There's none of that. And that's kind of scary moving forward because Kellett would experience Catherine's volatile behaviour pretty much straight away. On their wedding night, Catherine tried to strangle Kellett. Basically, they had sex 3 times. That's great. You're probably thinking like me. It's like, okay, what's wrong with that? Number one, he drinks too much, so it's a blinking miracle, And number two, 3 times. Some of us are lucky if we get it once, let alone 3 times. So, nothing wrong with that, except for Catherine. It wasn't good enough. And the reason it wasn't good enough is that she had heard that her own parents had sex about 5 times. And so she wanted sex 5 times. Now, Kellett did it 3 times and he fell asleep. Catherine was pissed off. She wanted it more. And her response was to try to strangle him on their wedding night. This is something that just basically gets worse and worse throughout their relationship. He would literally witness Catherine going from cheerful to aggressive, just in that instant. It's that splitting that I've spoken about. But in Catherine's case, it incorporates a level of violence as well, which, to be clear, is not the BPD. BPD is a bad rap for being violent, but unfortunately, it's a handful of people like Katherine Knight that kind of tarnish everybody with BPD. People with BPD generally tend to hurt themselves, not other people. In Catherine's case, I think what is happening is that she's got this BPD, which is her personality side, but then she's got this violent side as well, which is a separate thing that murderers and psychopaths and all those kind of people, they have this violent side. And then the BPD is kind of stoking that fire kind of thing. But it's not the reason that she's violent, if that makes sense. It's just something that exacerbates things. So in 1976, Catherine would go on to have a daughter. She was called Melissa Ann. But despite having a baby to now look after, it didn't help with Catherine's stability. It didn't calm her down. It didn't diminish her volatility. It didn't give her something else to focus on, something other than her possessiveness and controlling behaviors. Having this baby to look after didn't help at all. And she actually attacked Kellett with a broken beer bottle. She was just violent and unstable. And he got to a point where he couldn't cope anymore. He just couldn't take it and he left. He went to Queensland and he actually went to be with another woman. Now, Catherine, she's obviously already unhinged. And this kind of tipped her over the edge. And the next day that Kellett left, Catherine was seen walking through the streets and she had Melissa in the pram and she was walking down the street, thrusting the pram violently from side to side, pushing it into lampposts, poles, fences, whatever. She was being very, very violent and aggressive with this pram, this pushchair that she was pushing along. Now, Melissa is a few weeks old. She's very, very small and very, very vulnerable. And Catherine has zero regard for Melissa's safety, zero regard. She is literally smashing this pram into just anything and everything, poles, fences, posts, whatever. Now, Catherine was then admitted to St Elmo's Hospital. There, they basically diagnosed her with postnatal depression, and she spent a few weeks recovering in hospital. However, when she's released, she goes on to do something else. She's still obsessed with Kellett, but instead of focusing on her newborn baby, on Melissa, she's just obsessed with Kellett and the fact that he's left her and the fact that he's with another woman. I mean, God, that's the ultimate rejection, right? And she is just determined to get revenge on him, and that's what she does. So Melissa is like a couple of months old, very, very small. She takes Melissa and places Melissa on a railway track. This is an active, working railway track. She leaves Melissa on this track. She then heads into town, steals an axe, and is kind of swinging this axe around and threatening to kill people. She's gone totally crazy. Now, just to reassure you at this point that a man did come across Melissa and did take her off the track before a train came. Thank God for this man. But Catherine, she is clearly out of control and she's taken to hospital again. But she's discharged. A day or two later, she is discharged. And this is where I get really, really angry. The first time, postnatal depression, okay, it's understandable. She's got a newborn, they might think that. But the second time, this is attempted murder. If that man did not pick Melissa up from the track, Melissa would be dead. I don't understand why they released her so quickly. I mean, I say I don't understand, but this is another area where I can kind of relate to Catherine's experience a little bit, because I wasn't diagnosed with BPD until my 30s, and it took being admitted into psychiatric hospital for me to get that diagnosis. And I'd been in and out of hospital for years and been to doctors and just dismissed as troublemaking or given antidepressants and patted on the back and sent on my way. It just makes me really, really angry that this happened, because if people get that help early on, then things don't progress, or maybe they don't progress as much or as severely. It just makes things a bit more manageable. And Catherine's at this point where everything is very, very extreme. And if they had recognised earlier that there was something else going on, then maybe things wouldn't have got to the point that they did, and she'd have been able to manage her emotions and understand her triggers. Anyway, she's dismissed from the psych hospital, and obviously things aren't any better. She's still obsessed with finding Kellett. And she goes around to this co-worker's house called Molly, and Catherine tells Molly that Melissa is sick and that she needs a lift to the hospital. Molly agrees, obviously being a good friend. But then what happens is Catherine turns around and slashes the cheek of Molly's teenage daughter. So she gets a knife and somehow and slashes her teenage daughter's cheek, and then she takes Molly, the teenage daughter, and Molly's very young son. She takes them basically hostage and demands that Molly drive them to wherever Kellett is. Now, they end up stopping at this service station, and Molly and the daughter, they can escape, but Catherine takes the young boy, the young son, takes him hostage, and she's basically waving this metal rod about and threatening to kill people. And I don't mean to laugh because obviously, clearly, it's very, very serious. But what happens next just sounds absolutely ludicrous. So basically, what happens is the police come, and Catherine's violently waving this rod around. She's got a young boy hostage, and the police disarm her with broomsticks. So oh, it's serious, obviously. I'm not laughing at it. It just sounds ludicrous, right? That they disarm her with broomsticks. The important thing is she's disarmed and this young boy is fine. Anyway, she's admitted to psychiatric hospital again, and she actually told the nurses there the reason they had stopped at that service station is because she was planning to kill the mechanic there because, get this, the mechanic, he had fixed Kellett's car, which enabled Kellett to get away from her. So for that, she was going to kill the mechanic for doing his job, basically, and then she was going to kill Kellett and his mother. This is important because already she has plans on murdering people. Even early on, at this point, she is planning to murder her husband. And I'm furious that she wasn't diagnosed with anything else. I mean, she's literally taken a family hostage, threatened to kill people, put a 2-month-old baby on the railway tracks, on working railway tracks, and just dismissed, and it's just, what the hell? Anyway, Kellett obviously gets to find out what's happened. Now, I don't understand this bit either. He leaves his girlfriend, who is pregnant at this time, he leaves his pregnant girlfriend to go and be with the woman that tried to kill his baby and was going to kill him and his mother. Okay. Now, obviously, trying to be somewhat understanding here, there's a little goal involved. Now, I am going to rationalise that he's doing this for Melissa's safety. That's the way that I'm trying to rationalise this. I don't understand why he didn't take the baby and get the hell out of there. I don't get that, but I don't know all the details, and we need to be aware rather than just being like, well, they should have done this, should have done that. Yes, probably should have done all these things, should have just got the hell out of there and taken the baby away. But we don't know all the circumstances. So my rationale is that he went back to be with Catherine to look after Melissa. Now, obviously, whilst Catherine has been in the psychiatric hospital, Melissa has been taken care of by Ken and Barbara. And so Kellett and his mother, they drive to Ken and Barbara's house to go and pick up Melissa. And what happens is Barbara comes storming out of the house and basically tries to strangle Kellett because she blames him for everything that's happened to Catherine. And then Catherine witnesses Barbara trying to strangle her husband. She comes storming out of the house and punches Barbara, knocks her flat out. The poor mother-in-law, she's sat in the back seat, shaking like a leaf, terrified. It's just totally dysfunctional and a pretty good indicator here that Kellett should have taken Melissa and fled for his life. Anyway, he didn't. And he returns to Catherine and they try to make a go of things. In fact, they relocate to Queensland. Catherine got a job in an abattoir. It's a place she kind of feels at home, I guess. He got a job driving trucks. But, you're not going to be surprised if I tell you that things did not improve. And sadly, we've already seen that she was prepared to put her baby on a train track. There was another incident where clearly it's not just her partners that she's violent towards, but her children. Basically, Kellett's sister was staying with them. I believe Kellett had thrown a birthday party for Catherine's 21st birthday, and the family was there. The sister was there, and she heard screaming from the bathroom. She went upstairs to find out what was going on, and she found Catherine scolding her child with hot water. And when the sister went to tell Kellett's response was, don't say anything to Catherine, because he feared that if she did, that Catherine would try and kill him in his sleep, would try and kill his sister in his sleep. Imagine living like that. This constant fear that your wife is going to kill you or a member of your family. It's just no way to live. But as a result, the incident was never reported. It's so difficult to not be judgmental because you're like, why the hell didn't they report this? And again, we don't know what the situation was. But as an outsider and with hindsight, why the hell did people external to the situation who could see what was going on, why did they not do anything about it? It's just difficult to understand that. And like I say, if you're in it, if you're in the situation at the time, it's very different to being out of the situation and years later and, having hindsight and all that. It's a very different scenario, but it's still frustrating to witness, especially when there are children involved. Now, obviously, like I say, Kellett was a truck driver and she doesn't trust men and she certainly doesn't trust truck drivers. I don't think he was actually an angel. I think he did actually play away. So I think she probably had good reason to not trust him, but it was certainly very extreme. And if he did play away, then just leave him. But Catherine's brain didn't quite work that way. However, just to kind of balance it out a little bit here, it wasn't just him, it was her as well. In 1979, Kellett actually came home and found Catherine in bed with another man, with another meat worker. There is a double standard going on here, and it's not an ideal relationship by any means. But she begs him for another chance, which he gives her. And again, they reconcile, and she becomes pregnant again. She's already prone to these aggressive outbursts, so hormonally, it's probably, if it can be any worse, it's probably even worse. And it really was bad, so bad that she ends up hospitalizing Kellett. He was at a darts competition and he was doing really, really well. He was actually in the finals of this darts competition and he was out celebrating. But Catherine wanted him home. And he didn't want to go home. He was celebrating. He was in the finals. He was happy. Catherine became enraged. She became so enraged that when he got home, she struck him on the head with a frying pan. It was either a frying pan or an iron, something very, very heavy anyway, that when she hits him on the head, he runs to a neighbour's house and he basically collapses. He had a severe skull fracture. A skull fracture. He was in hospital for about 4 or 5 days. And when he returned, she had burnt all his clothes. He had nothing. He had no clothes, no shoes, nothing, just what he was wearing. That's how infuriated she was with him for being out and celebrating something that he was happy about. There was no like, oh my God, I'm so proud of you, congratulations, anything like that. It was like, no, thwack, I'm going to fracture your skull and burn all your clothes. Now, the police actually did want to press charges against Catherine. I'm not surprised, but she somehow convinced Kellett to basically drop the charges. I suspect it's because she was pregnant and he was probably scared of her. We hear about domestic violence towards women. Clearly, this is domestic violence towards men. He was scared, clearly, of her. So whether it was just sort of, simpler to do or whether he was scared of her, whatever, he dropped the charges. So no further action was taken against Catherine, but when he got out of hospital, this is where she hung her knives above the bed. Welcome home, honey. I got my knives out in case I need them. Wow. Red flag isn't strong enough for what we have going on here. I feel like there's got to be something else, something stronger than red, God knows what, but this is just off the charts crazy. And she gives birth actually because she was pregnant, obviously. So she gives birth to Natasha Marie in 1980. But, like I say, she continues to be paranoid. She's already hospitalized him. On another occasion, he wakes up to find her sitting on his chest, holding a knife to his throat. She thinks that he's got a woman in every town. He's a truck driver, and that's what she accuses him of. She's also making a point of how easy it would be for her to kill him. Because you imagine waking up and somebody's got a knife to your throat. Completely defenseless. She could kill him in that moment, and she's making a point. She wants him to know that she has this control over him. Craziness, though, crazily, it's actually Catherine that leaves him. He has a very, very lucky escape. But she goes back to Aberdeen. She gets a job in another slaughterhouse, but she actually injures her back and she ends up not being able to work, and she gets kind of disability payments, and she got a big payout, workers' compensation, things like that. And it was all enough to kind of set her up financially. But yes, she'd moved on, and Kellett obviously isn't seeing his daughters anymore. He sends them presents and gifts on their birthday. He sends Melissa flowers when she turns 13. He loves his daughters and he wants to maintain contact with them. And, oh, this makes me so angry. Catherine, she disposed of any gifts that he sent her. And in fact, Melissa said to her mum, has my father sent me anything? And she said, no, that bastard never sent you anything. If you're in a bad relationship, you leave the relationship, but you do everything you can to soften that blow for your children. And you sure as hell don't tell them that their father, who does love them, doesn't love them anymore, and that he never sent them anything. It's still her way of revenge. She's not even in the relationship anymore, but she's still obsessed with making Kellett suffer. And she does this through the children. This is like when she put Melissa on the train tracks. You think psychologically what that whole incident would have done to him. I said right at the start that he drank because of these traumatizing incidents that he'd been through when he was working on the railways. Children died. He was trying to save children that had been hit by a train. Katherine Knight puts his daughter, his baby daughter, on a train track. You think psychologically what that would do to him. I want to be somewhat understanding towards her, because obviously I know she's got the BPD and I know what it's like to live through that, but she knows what she's doing. She might have more difficulties coping daily life compared to people who do not have a mental illness, but it doesn't take away any culpability for your actions. You still know what you are doing. The psychological impact of what she put Kellett through when she put Melissa on those train tracks, it wasn't a case of just creating new trauma. She was rehashing old trauma for him. That is spiteful viciousness beyond a mental disorder. That is just being a really nasty, horrible, vindictive human being. Ultimately, the good news, though, is that Kellett did reunite with Melissa when she was 16, and he got to find out, because he obviously never knew that Catherine was doing this, that she was withholding the gifts. So, it was kind of a happy ending for Kellett, thankfully. But the years of abuse and trauma he suffered at the hands of Katherine Knight, and the psychological effects on those children, they're lifelong. They are lifelong. So Catherine's next relationship is with a man called David Saunders, who she meets in 1986. He was a 38-year-old coal miner. And basically, a few months after they met, he moved into Catherine's home with Catherine and her two daughters, Melissa and Natasha. And he moved in with his little dingo puppy, who he absolutely adored. Now, there was a lot of contention, a lot of arguments going on, because basically he kept his home in Scone, however you pronounce it. He kept his apartment. And I get the impression with this relationship, there was a lot of yo-yoing backwards and forwards, that, he would stay with her, but if there was a problem, he could go back to his apartment. And Catherine didn't like that. She wasn't very stable, as we know. She had a lot of trust issues, as we know. And so the fact that he kept this apartment in Scone, it just led to a lot of jealousy, a lot of arguments. And as you know, Catherine's arguments kind of tend to head towards the more violent side. And she was violent towards Saunders on multiple occasions. She damaged his car. She cut up his clothing. She broke a couple of his ribs. She stabbed him in the stomach with scissors, hit him in the face with an iron. Allegedly, he had steam marks on his face for weeks. Saunders would show up to work with cuts and bruises on his face. Um, in a nutshell, same old, same old. Things aren't getting any better. She's not calming down. Things aren't good. Now, sometime around this time, there was a suicide attempt. She ends up in psychiatric hospital again. Now, I know that around this time, Barbara did pass away. What I don't know with the timeline is whether she ended up in psychiatric hospital before her mother passed or after her mother passed. Now, Barbara's passing obviously was traumatic for Katherine. Somebody's death is going to have a huge impact on somebody. And even though Barbara wasn't the most affectionate of women, she was still Katherine's mother. And, we talked about Oscar, her uncle, and how she didn't deal with that trauma very well. She saw his ghost for years. And I imagine she's not dealing with the trauma of her mother's death either. Ultimately, what she's doing is taking that pain and that trauma out on other people, on her relationships, on the people around her. And it does get very, very bad. Katherine, as we know, she likes her punishment, she likes her revenge. Trigger warning, because she fears him playing away, her punishment, her revenge is to slash his puppy's throat. He tries to get away. He pushes her. This leads to a false pregnancy claim because she says that she is pregnant and accuses him of kind of kicking her in the stomach, which he obviously denies, and she wasn't even pregnant anyway. She then goes to her sister's house, to Joy's house. And when Joy opens the door, Katherine tells Joy that she has shot and killed Saunders. Now, this isn't true, but that's what she tells her sister. Initially, you think it's a really, really strange thing to do. But number one, she's getting a thrill from the reaction because she's shocking people and she wants that reaction. She wants to see the shock. And number two, we know that she intended to murder Kellett. Here, I believe that she was intending to murder Saunders. And she is basically looking at people's reactions to the news that she's killed somebody. It's all part of her kind of learning and planning and seeing what she can get away with, I guess. And I do believe she was planning to murder Saunders in the same way that she was planning to murder Kellett. There's obviously a lot of volatility in this relationship. There's a lot of yo-yoing backwards and forwards. And the only way she can stop him leaving is by killing him. And I kind of wonder if that's a similar thing with the puppy. She obviously gets the thrill. She wants to see his reaction. But to me, it's kind of her testing the waters of how far she can go. But anyway, despite this kind of tumultuousness, she gives birth to her third daughter, a little girl called Sarah, in 1988. And Saunders, he wants to kind of lay down roots for his daughter, and he puts down a deposit on a new home. And I said earlier that Katherine got this lump sum from, the compensation because she'd injured her back at work. She was basically able to pay off the house. So he'd put down the deposit, she paid the house off. And again, it kind of caused this contention because, kind of whose house was it? But she decorated this house. She decorated it in kind of a unique, macabre style. It was a Katherine Knight style. It was full of stuffed animals. There were animal skins, animal skulls, animal horns, animal traps, leather jackets, and then there was sort of instruments of violence like machetes and rakes and pitchforks. But despite Saunders and Katherine having this new home together, they've got a brand new baby together, all the nice things that new couples do together, getting a new home and all that stuff, things didn't improve. And ultimately, a bit like when Kellett just was, I've had enough, and went, Saunders did the same thing. He felt like he had to go into hiding. It was that bad. And I think this just shows the level of fear that these men had, because she was going to track them down. And we've seen that. She's obsessed with trying to find him, but nobody would tell her where he was. he did return because he's got a daughter. So obviously he wants to look out for his little girl. And bizarrely, when he returns, he finds out that she has taken out an apprehended violence order on him. Basically, from what I can gather, it's kind of like a restraining order. But she's taken it out on him. She has filed that he has been the aggressor when that's not what has happened. But once again, her revenge is to take away his access to his child. And the fact that she obviously told the police that he was the violent one, she was afraid of him. This is a good prelude to what we're going to see, that she starts manipulating situations. She starts setting the scene. She makes it look convincing to other people that she is the one that's being attacked when that is not what is going on. That is far from what's going on. So anyway, ultimately, that was the end of that relationship. Now, she then meets a man called John Chillingworth. And in 1990, she actually becomes pregnant for the fourth time with a little boy who she calls Eric. John Chillingworth was actually a co-worker. Again, I'm just going to be spinning the same old story. Violence, 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 threats, possessiveness, control, same stuff. She took his glasses from his face and broke them. She smashed his false teeth. This poor guy, he can't see, he can't eat, just all the fundamental things that you need to survive in this life. She's taking them away. I mean, sounds like a wonderful relationship, right? I don't need to tell you that their relationship didn't last long. It lasted, I think, about 3 years. But she actually was cheating on John Chillingsworth and left him for a man called John Price. And the other men that she left, they all had very, very lucky escapes because John Price, he was not so lucky. And it's really, really sad what she does to him. It's really, really sad. So John Charles Thomas Price, he was born on April the 4th, 1955. And he was well liked. Basically, people only have really nice, positive things to say about him. He was known as Pricey, and he was just an all round lovely man. There's nothing but positive reports about him. Before he met Catherine, he was married to another woman, and he was actually the father of 3 children. He had a 2-year-old daughter who stayed with his former wife, and then his 2 older children, they actually lived with him. Now, John was aware of Catherine's violent reputation, and I do kind of struggle to understand a little bit when there are children involved why you would be involved with somebody who had a violent reputation. Now, I'm guessing the children were a little bit older, perhaps, but still, I do struggle with it. And Catherine actually moved in with Price and his 2 children. And I really don't want to be crass, but from all the reports out there, one of the alluring things about Catherine was the fact that she was good in bed. And allegedly, according to a lot of reports, that's one of the reasons why these men kept going back to her. And it kind of makes sense, at least initially at the start, it makes sense that that would be a factor. However, I struggle with that explanation as the relationship kind of goes on, because clearly this is turning into a domestic violence issue and men were clearly afraid of her. Yeah, I just struggle with that explanation because there were children involved. And I don't know, I just don't see you putting your children at risk for somebody who just happens to be good in bed. So I think there might be more to it, but I don't know what. But anyway, that's what the reports say. So obviously, the cracks did begin to appear. And like her relationship before with Saunders, there was a lot of contention around the marital home, or his marital home. I mean, it wasn't her home, it was his marital home with his kids. Basically, he still had a lot of his ex-wife's possessions in this home, which I don't think Catherine liked. And she also resented the fact that John Price didn't divorce his ex-wife. She wants to marry him. Now, as I said right at the start, when she married Kellett, that seems to be an issue for her, that I got the impression that she kind of dragged Kellett to the altar, perhaps, because I get this idea that she wants to hold on to her men and marriage is a way for her to do that. And that's no different here. She wants to marry Price, and so the fact that he isn't divorced annoys her. In fact, he makes it clear to her that he's in the relationship for sex. So, yeah. But then the icing on the cake, I think, is the fact that Price has put the home in the names of the children. So if anything happens to him, the house goes to the children. Catherine believed if anything happened to him, the house should go to her. What? It's like, what? This woman's crazy. Fair enough, he put the house in the name of his children, for God's sake. But it caused issues. This led to violence. This led to revenge. And yeah, she wanted revenge on him, all right. In 1998, she actually video recorded a number of items Price had scavenged from his work. Now, in a lot of workplaces, you can't kind of take even the rubbish. Well, he took some of the rubbish, and we're talking things like expired first aid kits, things that were being thrown away. He wasn't stealing normal stuff, just stuff that was being thrown away. But workforce regulations meant he wasn't even allowed to do that. Fair enough. They were the regulations. But Katherine filmed these items and took the video to Price's boss. He lost his job. He had worked in this mine for 17 years. And after 17 years of being a dedicated, loyal employee at this mine, he lost his job because of Catherine's desire for revenge and retaliation. It's ridiculous. It's petty. He's got a house to pay for. He's got kids to look after. She jeopardizes his financial security. And it's her financial security as well. It's not just him, it's her as well. Now, he is peeved, seriously peeved, as you can imagine, and kicks her out. But he takes her back. And yeah, same old pattern. Yo-yoing backwards and forwards in the relationship, hate, love. It's perpetual, this switching and these perpetual accusations of him cheating on her. And ultimately, it gets to kind of a boiling point. And he actually is fearing for his life. He begins expressing to other people that he fears for his life, that he believes Katherine is going to murder him. Unfortunately, he's right. And for Katherine as well, this kind of dabbling with going to kill people, this is also increasing. Her kind of sussing out situations and planning and plotting and manipulating, it's all kind of snowballed to this head that we are coming to. And she's even expressing to people her intention to murder him. In fact, she tells her brother that she intends to kill Pricey and that she was going to get away with it because she was going to make out that she was mad. But yeah, it's becoming obvious. It's obvious, like Katherine is talking about doing it. It's obvious to Price that she wants to do it. He's telling people he wants her out of the house. He's worried for himself. He's worried for his children. He confides to his friends. He confides to his boss. He tells them about the level of abuse that he's suffering at her hands. And by confiding all this, it was kind of a way for him to get witnesses. There were witnesses to what was going on. Imagine living your life like this. You are genuinely terrified that the person you are with is going to kill you, is going to hurt your children. He genuinely didn't know how to get her out of the house. He wanted her out of the house and he couldn't get her out. She even said, "You'll never get me out of this house." One of his friends even overheard her saying that to him. She said, "I'll do you in first. I'll do you in first." That's what she said. And poor Price, he didn't know what to do. It was relentless. And in February 2000, it comes to a head. It comes to a boiling point. She stabs him. He kicks her out again. He sought refuge at a friend's house, again, expressed his fear, expressed his concern that, she was going to kill him. He asked the police for help. The police actually said to him that they couldn't help. They couldn't help him get Katherine out of the house, that he had to go to court. They said it was a court matter. And, the police were right. It was a court matter, but it's just incredibly sad that he asked the police for help and he didn't get that help. And I mean, he does go to court, but it's just all too late. It's just all too late. So whilst he's trying to kind of set things up so that he can get her out of the house, she's also doing her own things to manipulate the situation and to s- set the scene. Like I said before, she's good at setting scenes. And one of the things she does, so when her and Price would argue, she did have bruising on her. And so what she does, she goes to a doctor's and she shows him the bruises. Now, the doctor actually later testified that he felt that when she went to him, she wasn't going to seek medical attention. She wanted it documented that she had this bruising. So she was setting the scene. She would show people, friends, this bruising and say that she was the one being attacked, being assaulted. This wasn't true, but that's what she was doing. She was documenting that it was her that was being abused. And clearly, not only is it manipulating, but it's showing the premeditation that she's planning this out. And on February the 29th, yeah, 29th, it's a leap year, you know, the day that women show their love for their men. Well, on this day, John Price, he actually did stop at Scone Magistrate Court. He actually told the court that the night before he woke up in bed and found Katherine standing at the end of the bed and she had her hand behind her back and he was terrified. He thought she had a knife. It turns out she didn't have a knife. He could see in the mirror behind her that she wasn't holding this knife. But the panic and the fear going through him, she did that on purpose. She did that to terrify him and to play mind games. He was so scared. He told his co-workers that if he didn't turn up for work, she'd killed him. His co-workers pleaded with him to not go home, but he had to because of the children. He was worried if he didn't go home that she would do something to them. So that night on the 29th, he goes home and to his relief, Katherine wasn't there. But like I said, that's because she was plotting and planning and doing things, setting the scene. So she'd been showing people these bruises. She had also gone out and bought lingerie. She had taken the youngest children to her daughter Natasha's house to babysit them. So when Price got home, Katherine wasn't there and the children weren't there. And she also went to her sister's home and borrowed her video camera because she basically made these kind of home videos of her playing with the kids, looking all happy. And on these videos, she was expressing her love for her children, for her family. And she looked directly at the camera and she would say, I love all my children. I hope that I see you all again. I mean, obviously, this footage has been interpreted as kind of a crude will, a crude suicide note, whatever. It's just manipulation. It's all manipulation. So, anyway, Price gets home, nobody's there, he's relieved. He went to a neighbour's, he chilled, relaxed, had a few beers. He also told his neighbour that if his neighbour should wake up in the morning and Price's van was still in the driveway, that he should call the police because that would mean that Katherine had killed him. Imagine living your life like this. You're telling your neighbour that if my van is still there in the morning and I've not gone to work, that means I'm dead. So anyway, he goes home. It's about 11 o'clock and he goes to bed. Meanwhile, Katherine, the reason she wasn't there, as I said, is because she was doing stuff, setting the scene. I mean, she's definitely setting a scene because later on, her daughter Natasha would actually say that she could sense that her mother was being unstable. She could sense that things weren't right because she actually said to her mother, I hope you're not planning to kill yourself and Price. I don't know. Again, people outside could see it, but then you're not going to take it seriously, are you? You're not going to think that somebody is actually going to go through with it, especially your own mother. So, you know, it's difficult to not be judgmental, but I think it's just more, it's frustrating. It's frustrating more than anything because obviously, in hindsight, you can see the signs, but when you're in it, when you're living it, it's very, very different to being in it. But if anything, it's just an indication that this was definitely 100% completely premeditated. And that's important later when she goes to court. Obviously, the fact that she can't play the insanity card because she's blinking planning this. So she lets herself into Price's home. He's in bed. It's around about 11 o'clock. She's got a set of keys. She watches TV for a bit. She has a shower. She puts on her sexy black lingerie. She wakes Price up. They have sex. He goes back to sleep. And that's the moment that she launches this horrific, vicious assault on Price while he was sleeping. She repeatedly stabs him in the chest with a butcher's knife. He desperately tries to fight back. He desperately tries to escape. He staggers down the hallway. He turns on the lights, and you can tell all this from the blood evidence. And she is just following him and stabbing him relentlessly. He's desperately trying to get away from her. And she's there just stabbing, 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 stabbing his back, stabbing his neck. It even looks like he managed to get outside because he opens the front door, but she just yanks him back in. She drags him back in. You know, there's blood on the handle. He made it to the door. He made it to the door. Whether he'd have actually survived, though, I mean, this was a frenzied, relentless attack. And she ended up stabbing him 37 times. 37 times. And there was just no chance. He ended up dying in the hallway of his house. The autopsy revealed that the wounds that she inflicted on him, they were so deep and so vicious that she penetrated his vital organs. This included his aorta, his lungs, his liver, his stomach, his kidney, his colon, everything, all of it. It was a vicious, frenzied attack. That's the level of rage and anger that Katherine Knight has. Saying that, though, I'm not sure it's totally angry at him as opposed to what he represents, and he represents men. She's angry at men. She's angry at the abuse she had. She's angry at her home life. She's angry at her parents. She's probably angry at society. She's probably angry at the fact that she's got something going on with her. She doesn't know what it is yet. She hasn't been diagnosed yet, but she knows that she doesn't feel right. She's probably angry at so many things. And this is why I get so angry, because she had been in and out of psych hospital. And if they had picked up what was going on, that anger, you're still going to be angry. You're still going to feel those things, but it's just not as intense. You learn how to control it, and you learn what your triggers are that bring that on. And I'm not for a second trying to make an excuse for Katherine Knight. What she did was horrific, and it was premeditated. She knew what she was doing. So there are no excuses for her. But I'm still angry with the fact that these things were missed and it got to the point that it did. And I guess I'm angry because I know firsthand that there are failures in the system. I know because it happened to me. I was fobbed off for years. It took going into psychiatric hospital for anything to be done, for me to be helped. And it shouldn't take getting to that point. There are lots of signs before you get to that point. And so I guess I just relate to that. But it infuriates me because people like John Price are the results of this failing in the system. And it just doesn't have to be that way. Or at least not always. I mean, I'm sure a lot of the times something can be done. And yeah, I'm angry, but I'm sad as well. Incredibly sad, incredibly frustrated. There were so many signs. Anyway, he's dead in the hallway. Katherine Knight, she changes. And she drives to an ATM. Now, this ATM is about half an hour away, so altogether it's about an hour's round trip. And she drives to this ATM and she withdraws $1,000 from John Price's bank account. To this day, nobody really knows why she did that, why she took that money out. It's very strange. She then drives home, she parks her car, and then she walks back to John Price's house. I mean, absolute control. She's parking in front of her own house and then walking back to his house. And then what she does next is truly horrific. She drags John Price's body from the hallway into the lounge, and there she proceeds to skin him. She ultimately removes his entire skin, which includes his face, his nose, his ears, his neck, his torso, his genitals, his legs, just everything, all of it. She removes it in one piece. We can see why she was so fascinated at the abattoir, watching the workers and what they were doing. And she picked up this skill that she is able to skin him in one piece. In fact, his skin was so complete that post-mortem, they were able to sew his skin back onto his body for his funeral. That's how complete it was. Now, I don't want to attribute skill to this woman and to this vile act that she has done, but I'm using it in the sense that she had this precision. she had this control. This precision and this control, whilst she is doing this horrific act of skinning a man, proves that she had control over her actions. This wasn't a moment of insanity. This was precision, this was skill, and she's literally gone from frenzied attacking to this very controlled, precise action of skinning somebody. The amount of time that it would have taken, it's not like a quick 2-minute thing. I mean, I have no idea, obviously. I mean, I've never stuffed a chicken, let alone skinned anything. So I have no idea how long these things take. But like I say, it's not 2 minutes, and it's thought out, it's meticulous, and definitely not the actions of somebody who is mad or insane. And then she takes this skin and she hangs it from a meat hook that's kind of at the door. So she's basically hanging this skin at the door to the lounge room. Oh, it makes you feel sick, doesn't it, just thinking about it? Poor old John Price, he's been skinned. His skin is hanging up at the door. His body with no skin is lying on the ground. You can see everything. You can see the muscles and the nerves and the organs, and it's just, oh God, it's just horrendous. And this poor man, but that wasn't enough for Katherine. She wanted something more. So what she does is she then decapitates him. And she carries his head from the lounge into the kitchen. There are literally drops of blood that lead from the lounge to the kitchen. And in the kitchen is a big pot. She puts his head in the pot and she cooks him. She cooks his head. Whilst his head is cooking, she takes time peeling vegetables. She has his head in a pot. She's peeling her vegetables to put in this pot. She knows what she's doing. She goes back to the body and she slices part of his buttocks and she puts these steaks from his buttocks in the oven and cooks them. When they are cooked, she puts them on plates. So on these plates, we have John Price's buttock steaks, but there's also baked potato, pumpkin, there's courgettes or zucchinis, depending where you're from, there's cabbage, there's squash. She even makes up some gravy. Sounds delicious. And she puts little notes next to the plates with the names of his children on. She serves these up for the children. She's lovely, right? She is a lovely woman. Who knows whether she intended the kids to see that? I find it difficult for my brain to even go there, because who would do that to innocent kids? Who would do that? It's just something else. Now, the contents of the notes that she'd written for the children, they were never released. That was to protect the children, and that's a good thing. But there was actually another note that she had written that was released, and she'd left this note on top of a photograph of Price, and this note was obviously covered in blood spatter and bits of John, and it was just horrible. But basically, this note was accusing John of molesting the children. Now, the accusations, to be clear, were groundless, completely groundless. But it's clearly her way of getting the ultimate control, because she's thinking if people believe that he abused the children, that number one, it would help her get out of it. It might make an excuse for her. But number two, he can't defend himself. He cannot defend himself. And that is the ultimate control for Katherine. With the other relationships, she took the children away. With John Price, she can't take the children away because he's dead, but she can still do something afterwards, and that's have people thinking he's a child abuser. To do that to any man when it's not true, and any man who can't defend themselves, it's despicable. But thankfully, people didn't fall for it. It was groundless. What the note actually said was, "Time got you back, Jonathan, for raping my daughter. You to bet for Ross, for Little John. Now play with Little John's dick, John Price." Now, you can see in this note just how bad her level of writing and spelling and all that is. I mean, like I said, she left school when she was 15 and couldn't read or write, apparently. I mean, she's obviously picked up some reading and writing, but it's not very good, clearly. But yeah, thankfully, like I say, nobody saw through it. It was groundless. So she's got his skinned, decapitated body lying in the lounge. The skin is hanging up. She wants to violate him even more. And so she kind of poses him. She kind of drapes his arm over an empty soda bottle and crosses his legs. I've got no idea what that really means. But later in court, it was claimed that it was some kind of contempt for him. Personally, I think that first stab that she took at him was the ultimate contempt for him. But there you go. Not sure what that means, but it was all show, it was all control, it was all power. And then, I said that she was going to try and fool everybody by saying that she would kill Pricey and then make it look like she was insane. Well, she next goes on to swallow an assortment of prescription medication and attempts to commit suicide. Now, I'm going to say this very, very loosely because she does not really, really attempt to commit suicide. It's all part of the show. I'm mad. I don't know what I'm doing. Oh, boo-hoo. Poor me. Now, she does take pills. Don't get me wrong. She takes pills. She falls into this deep sleep, apparently, allegedly, apparently. But the pills that she took, even the medical examiner said that the quantity that she took was within the therapeutic range. Basically, this was medication that she had at home anyway, and she knew what quantities to take, and she took within that range. And the courts ultimately concluded that this was not a genuine suicide attempt. Now, normally I wouldn't speak disparagingly of anybody that tries to take their own life. The difference here is that Catherine's doing it for show. She's trying to take the heat off herself and this horrific act that she has committed. So I have no sympathy with her here. So, I said the night before, Price had been to the neighbour's house and he'd said that if the van was still there in the morning to call the police. Well, the van was still there in the morning. Also, remember, Price had told his colleagues at work he was fearful that something was going to happen. So the next morning, the neighbour wakes up, the van's there. Work, he doesn't turn up. His colleagues are concerned. So colleagues went around to the house and the neighbour also went round to check. They knocked on the door. Obviously, there was no response. They ended up calling the police. The police went around. They went around to the rear of the house. They broke in through the back door. They obviously have zero idea what is inside that house. All they can smell is the smell of meat cooking. They walk in through the back door and they see the skin hanging up. They don't know at this point, obviously, that it's a skin. They assume it's a curtain or a blanket, just some kind of covering over the door. They go to push it aside. And the officer that pushes it to the side, he feels this wetness and this coldness on his skin. And he looks down and he sees the blood. Dear God, you imagine the realization that must have come over him at that point as to what this was, that they realize at that moment that ain't no curtain. That ain't no curtain hanging up. The courts actually describe it as a pelt. I don't like describing it as a pelt because it sounds a bit animalistic and I don't know why. But anyway, that's how they describe it, as a pelt. But yeah, so they find Price's skin hanging up and then they walk into the lounge. Oh my God, can you imagine the scene of absolute horror that those poor officers would have faced? We have John Price's body, there's no skin, there's no head. Near the body, there were knives, there were knife sharpeners. This woman, she stopped what she was doing to sharpen her knives. This woman is disgusting. She stopped to sharpen her knives. So the officers walk into the kitchen, take the lid off the pot. There's the plates with the steaks. They've probably worked out by now what it is. What they saw that day is enough to traumatise anybody. It's no surprise that they had PTSD, that they had to take time off work, that they gave up bloody meat. What they had to face, the horrors inside that house. But it wasn't just inside the house, because outside the house, there was another plate of food discarded on the back lawn. Now, nobody really knows why Catherine discarded that plate of food on the lawn. There's a couple of theories, and the first theory is that she tried to eat it herself, couldn't, and threw it out. And if you have heard of this case before, you might have seen references to it of Catherine being a cannibal killer or references to cannibalism anyway. I tend to stay away from that because I don't think what she did was for cannibalistic reasons. I think this was just a shock factor thing. She was just degrading his body as much as she could. And yeah, okay, there's a bit of a cannibalistic undertone going on here. I just wouldn't say cannibal. And I think people use the word cannibal as a hook to get people into the story. To me, that's not what happened here. Yeah, okay, she might have tried the food. I'm not sure. I don't know. I wasn't there, thank God. But I think ultimately what she was doing was she was throwing it out for the animals, for the dogs. I think that's what she was doing. It's just an extra level of degradation to poor John Price. But those are the theories. It was either she tried to eat the food, she, made up a plate for herself, which possibly could be a bit of a combination of both, actually. Maybe she did, changed her mind and threw it out for the animals. I don't know. But regardless, I mean, these poor officers, they were traumatised, absolutely traumatised. And that's why some media outlets, they didn't even report it. So anyway, they find Catherine lying unresponsive, allegedly, apparently unresponsive, on the bed. She's taken to hospital. About 5 days later, she's questioned by the authorities and she claims to not remember anything.
Can't remember anything.
All she could remember, apparently, allegedly, is having sex with Price and falling asleep. She didn't remember stabbing him 37 times. Oh, no, I don't remember that. She didn't remember skinning him with precision for quite a long time. She didn't remember hanging his skin on a meat hook. She didn't remember decapitating him. She didn't remember peeling vegetables. I mean, I also try and forget the memories of peeling vegetables because it's so mind-numbingly boring. But if I had a head boiling on my stove in a pot, I would remember peeling those bloody vegetables.
Can't remember anything.
But Katherine Knight, she can't remember anything. Oh, no. Can't remember a thing.
Can't remember anything.
I mean, she did ultimately later confess to killing Price. I mean, she did. But she did what she said she would do, and she used domestic violence, and she used the insanity card and all that stuff. But domestic violence, I mean, for God's sake, let's just say for a second that he did attack her and that she was defending herself. You don't defend yourself by stabbing somebody 37 times, skinning them, decapitating them, cooking them, leaving notes for the children. How does that even make sense? If you're defending yourself, you might stab somebody once or twice and then you leg it out of there. Honestly, murderers are stupid. I've said this before and I'll say it again. Put it on my gravestone. Murderers are stupid. Anyway, the police, obviously, they weren't having it. They interviewed everybody. It was obvious, it was apparent that she was not the victim of domestic abuse. John Price was the victim and she was the perpetrator, without a doubt. It did take a while for the court case to get going. It was scheduled for July 2001 and it was postponed due to her counsel's illness. It was then rescheduled for October 2001, but there were further delays because basically the evidence that they were showing in the court, the photographic evidence, it was just so disturbing and horrific that the jury were given the option to be excused. And so basically several jury members chose to remove themselves and they had to get additional jurors, and that meant more delays. And then when Catherine changed her plea to guilty, the judge obviously didn't trust her and was worried that she would try and use the insanity card later on and basically say that she was insane when she pled guilty. And so he wanted to make sure that she was pleading guilty because she was guilty. She wasn't going to turn around later on and say that she was insane when she made that plea. So he ordered a psychiatric evaluation. And so this is where the diagnosis of BPD comes in. I mean, she's got a personality disorder, but that does not make you insane. Ultimately, she couldn't use that as an excuse. So on October the 18th, the court formally accepted her guilty plea based on that psychiatric evaluation. And so she was formally charged with the murder. So obviously, her defense still tried to argue that she wasn't in control of what she was doing. And, they tried to use her troubled past as an excuse for diminished responsibility. I mean, yeah, she had a troubled past, but so do a lot of other people. She had mental health struggles. Yeah, she did. So do a lot of other people. It doesn't mean you can go around and murder people. Anyway, the defense tried to claim that all these factors, they affected her judgment, they affected her actions. Bull crap. This was planned. This was thought out. Don't forget as well, she left the scene. She went and took out the money. She showered, she changed, she parked somewhere else, she went back to the house. She took pleasure. She took pleasure from mutilating his body. This was part of her wanting revenge, and we've seen this in all her relationships. She takes out revenge, and it makes her incredibly dangerous. Anyway, obviously, the prosecution, on the other hand, spoke about the whole premeditated side of it, obviously, which we know. We know she did the recordings and she set the scene and she set everything up. And then there were family members and friends who all testified that they heard her saying that she was going to kill him. They testified that he said that she was going to kill him. It was just obvious. And I think, I'm talking about her putting on this act. She tries one last time in court to manipulate everybody around her and put on this act because she's losing it. She knows she's losing it. It's pretty obvious she's losing it. And when the forensic examiner talks about the skinning and all the gruesome stuff that she did, she kind of went into this hysterical state. She has this big over the top scene, so much so that she has to be sedated. She knows that the gig is up. She knows she can't manipulate anybody anymore. But she's still going to damn right try to. She's still going to put on this show. She's still going to show the world what she wants other people to see. But it all makes sense. I mean, it all fits. If we go back to her childhood and we go back to how people would say that they were scared of her and that they didn't mess with her, she's putting on this tough persona from the start. She's presenting herself a certain way to convince people that she was this way and that she couldn't be messed with, and ultimately that she couldn't be hurt. And so it's important to her to put on this act all the time. But the problem with that is that we never really get to see the true Catherine because she's just always in this defense mode. And so we never really get to see who the real Katherine Knight is when she's not being defensive. And those would be those odd occasions when people say that she's this nice person. And that's probably who she really is, but she just doesn't know how to deal with the other stuff. And that's why it's so sad that she didn't get that help beforehand to help deal with that stuff. It wouldn't have taken away that kind of, there was clearly that spark of something worse there. Clearly, she obviously got this enjoyment from seeing people suffer. But whether that spark of that nasty side, whether that might have been kind of put out if the personality side of her, if that had been dealt with, that spark might have gone out as well. It might not have done. Of course, she could have been an absolute psychopath and there could have been absolutely nothing anybody could have done. I don't know. I'm not a psychiatrist. I don't think so in this case. I think she was pretty nasty, pretty horrible, and but I also think things might not have got so extreme. I don't know. Maybe it's wishful thinking. And, like I've said, not for 1 second trying to defend her. Not for 1 second. I mean, God's sake, I can't stand the woman. But it just comes back. Can we recognise this so much sooner? Can we see this happening sooner? Please. People don't need to die. That's all I'm saying. And I apologise if it comes across that I'm ever at any point kind of defending her because I'm really honestly not. I'm trying to understand it so that we can recognise it. That's half the battle, so that these things don't keep happening. Anyway, long story short, on November the 8th, 2001, Katherine Knight became the first woman in Australian history to receive a life sentence without the possibility of parole. And I'm not surprised. I am not surprised. Her file was marked with a directive never to be released. Never to be released. I'm not surprised. She did try to appeal actually in 2006. She basically argued that the life without parole sentence was too harsh and that what she did to John Price's body, you know, the mutilation and all that stuff, what she did, as if it was nothing. But she argued that what she did, it wasn't relevant to the crime. Really? Really? I think it's pretty relevant. Basically, I think what she's trying to say is that she could be rehabilitated. Well, I don't give a crap if she's rehabilitated. She still needs to be punished. You need to be punished for what you've done. And it shows a complete disregard for John Price's family, for the people that she's hurt, for the victims. It shows a complete and utter disregard. Like I've said so many times, just take your bloody punishment. You know, you do the crime, you do the time. Simple as. And you're lucky that you've still got your skin on you whilst you're doing your time, you know? Just horrible. So yeah, anyway, the court agreed and they threw it out. Gone. That woman is never being released. So she's currently housed at Silverwater Women's Correctional Centre in New South Wales. She was a Category 4 inmate. I think that's kind of the highest of the categories. Basically, she's closely monitored, and again, I'm not really surprised. She's apparently found religion. She likes painting. She likes knitting. I think she sells her paintings, actually. She doesn't put her name on them because she doesn't want people to know who she is. I think they raise money for charity anyway, so at least something. And you won't be surprised to hear Katherine Knight is not allowed in the kitchen. You are not allowed in the kitchen, Miss Knight. Oh, no, 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 no. Never, never, never. Never gonna happen. Not gonna happen. That's the story of Katherine Knight. Poor John Price. My heart bleeds for his family. It really, truly does. I mean, to be murdered in itself is horrific. But to be murdered and then have all this stuff on top, my heart absolutely bleeds for his poor family, his poor children. I'm so sorry for them. I'm so, so sorry for them. What she did was despicable. And then, of course, like I've said before, it's the trauma of her own kids. I mean, whether they even recognise it or not, I've heard that Melissa still defends her mother. I don't know. I don't know if that's true. No idea. They're still going to be traumatised, whether they realise it or not. They're going to be traumatised. What she did to those children, I don't believe for a second that those kids haven't been traumatised by what their mother did. And like I've said before, you know, it's something that goes on for generations. All this trauma, it just gets carried on. It gets carried on down. And, you know, the only takeaway that we can get from this case is, like I've said, all the way through, it's recognition. It's recognising early on that somebody needs help. I mean, for God's sake, if leaving your daughter on a train track is not a big enough clue, then God help us. I don't know what more to say. So I will just leave it there and let me know what you think. You look after yourselves, like I always say, and like I always say, I mean it. I really do genuinely mean it. These cases are horrific. If you feel in any way traumatised, go and hug a tree. That's going to be my mantra from now on. I'm going to tell everybody to just go and hug a tree. And it sounds crackers, but it works. Trust me, it works. Grounding yourself. And I've come to discover that through my dialectical behavioural therapy, actually, because I before would never have hugged a tree. But it really does, I don't know. There's something about just, I don't know, connecting with nature and just steadying yourself in this crappy world. If this video doesn't turn out too bad, which I'm praying to God it doesn't, then a like, a subscribe, all that stuff would be appreciated. And like I say, thank you so much to anybody who already has. It means a lot. It means more than a lot. And yeah, you look after yourselves. Hug a tree. Hug your loved ones first before you hug your tree. But then hug your tree. You know what I mean. You look after yourselves. And I will see you back here for another true crime case at my true criminal abode. Bye.